Operation Jupiter was an offensive launched by VIII Corps of the British Second Army on 10 July 1944 during the Battle of Normandy in the Second World War. The objective of the 43rd Infantry Division, commanded by Major-General Ivo Thomas, was to capture the villages of Baron-sur-Odon, Fontaine-Étoupefour, Chateau de Fontaine, and to recapture Hill 112. An attached brigade of the 15th Infantry Division would take Éterville, Maltot and the ground up to the River Orne, and then the tanks of the 4th Armoured Brigade, supported by infantry, would advance through the captured ground and secure several villages to the west of the River Orne. It was hoped that the initial objectives could be captured by 9 o'clock a.m., after which the 4th Armoured Brigade would exploit the success. The British advance went well at first, but fighting for Hill 112 took all day and Maltot changed hands several times. On the 11th of July, counter-attacks by the 10th SS Panzer Division Frensburg and the 102nd SS Heavy Panzer Battalion in the afternoon forced the British off the top of Hill 112 to positions on the north-facing slope. The operation was a tactical failure for VIII Corps but a strategic success for the Allies, attrition having reduced the 2nd SS Panzer Corps to a condition from which it never recovered. British operations of the Second Battle of the Odon, conducted in the Odon Valley, continued in July, and the 53rd Infantry Division occupied Hill 112, almost unopposed, on the 4th of August. After the Germans withdrew during Operation Cobra and Operation Bluecoat further west, a stone memorial to the 43rd Division was built on the hill in the late 1940s. Background: Operation Epsom. The first battle for Hill 112 was fought at the end of Operation Epsom, when the tanks of 11th Armoured Division broke out from a bridgehead established by the 2nd Battalion, Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders, part of 227th Infantry Brigade, 15th Infantry Division, at Tourmeville. Hill 112 was an intermediate objective on the way to the River Orne crossings, but such was the German reaction that the 23rd Hussars were only able to capture and hold the hill with difficulty. Hill 112, at the end of a narrow salient, was held by the infantry of the 8th Battalion, Rifle Brigade. Here they remained under shell and mortar fire until ultra-decryption of German radio traffic showed that the 2nd SS Panzer Corps was arriving. Before the German reinforcements could attack, General Bernard Montgomery ordered a withdrawal from the hilltop. Montgomery intended to hold the panzer divisions on the British-Canadian front, while the 1st U.S. Army continued the Battle of Cherbourg and broke out from the beachhead. The American objective was feasible, because they had only the equivalent of 1.5 panzer divisions facing them. Despite German attempts to disengage panzer units from the east end of the bridgehead, Operation Charnwood. Operation Charnwood took place from 8 to 9 July, to capture Caen and forestall the transfer of German armored units from the Anglo-Canadian front in the east to the American sector. 3 infantry divisions, supported by 3 armored brigades, attacked behind a creeping barrage and made gradual progress against the 12th SS Panzer Division, Hitlerjugend, and the 16th Luftwaffe Field Division. By the end of the day, the 3rd Canadian Division, the British 3rd Infantry Division, and the 59th Infantry Division had reached Caen. At dawn, the attackers met the remnants of German units which were retreating across the Orne. Carpiquet airfield had fallen to the Canadians in morning, and by 6 o'clock p.m., the British and Canadians had closed up to the north bank of the Orne, with the remaining bridges fortified fortified or impassable, and with German reserves close by. The British First Corps ended the operation. Charnwood was mutually costly but a tactical success for the Allies. The Germans were expelled from north of the Orne but established a defensive line south of the city and continued to transfer formations to the American front. Prelude. Plan of attack. The 43rd Infantry Division, the attached 31st Tank Brigade with the 141st Regiment Royal Armoured Corps Crocodiles from the 79th Armoured Division and the 4th Armoured Brigade were supported by the 3rd and 8th Army Group Royal Artillery for an attack in 3 stages. In Phase 1, the 130th Infantry Brigade and 9th Royal Tank Regiment were to occupy German salient around Les Douanes and capture Chateau de Fontaine, as the 129th Brigade with the 7th Royal Tank Regiment attacked Hill 112. In Phase 2, the 129th Infantry Brigade would form a defensive flank along the northern slope of Hill 112, facing Éterville to the southwest. Simultaneously, the 130th Brigade, 9th RTR and Churchill Crocodiles would attack Éterville and Maltot, and if the attack succeeded, it was to be followed by an advance southeast of Hill 112 towards Street Martin. In Phase 3, the 129th Brigade was to stay on Hill 112, while the 130th Brigade dug in from Éterville to Maltot facing east. The 4th Armoured Brigade and the 214th Infantry Brigade of the 43rd Division would then advance between the 129th and 130th Brigades, south to the Orne and form a bridgehead. The 46th Brigade of the 15th Division and a squadron of the 7th RTR would then clear the ground between the Odon, Orne and the western suburbs of Caen. Battle. Operation Jupiter began from the Odon bridgehead, which ran from Verson to Baron, after the 214th Brigade crossed the river during the night of 8-9 July. After a preliminary bombardment, the 1st Battalions of the 43rd Division reached Éterville and the north slope of Hill 112 by 8 o'clock a.m., and the advance to Maltot began. The village was entered but determined German defenders, mortar fire and armoured counter-attacks made the British position in the village untenable. Without control of Hill 112, the German defenders on the hill were dug into cornfields and tanks were hidden in copses. The Germans stopped the British advance at the Éterville road and below the crest on the flanks. In the evening, the 5th Battalion, Duke of Cornwall's Light Infantry of 214th Brigade and the 7th Royal Tank Regiment attacked the hill and reached the hilltop and woods nearby, which brought the 443rd Division brigades onto the ridge. To the north of Éterville, troops of the 3rd Canadian Division had crossed the Odon and extended the salient to the east. German counter-attacks began around midnight and got into Éterville several times. On the hill, the 5th DCLI was forced back to the Éterville road, after all its anti-tanks guns were destroyed and 240 casualties had been incurred. During the battle, General Heinrich Kaberbach, the commander of Panzer Group West, had made the defense of Hill 112 the priority of the 2nd SS Panzer Corps, but the British advance had taken the north slope and got halfway across the hilltop. The German defenders had survived naval bombardment, air attack and artillery fire but held much of the ground, with the support of Tiger tanks of the Schwer SS Panzer Abteilung 102, which had arrived in Normandy 2 days previous. Aftermath. Analysis. Exploitation of a German retirement from Caen after Operation Charnwood had not been possible, since the Germans only withdrew to the south bank of the Orne. The British had attacked up open slopes to reach the top of Hill 112, commanded by dug-in German units and tanks on the reverse slope. Narrow front attacks had been tactically unwise, but lack of troops and the strategic circumstances had made them unavoidable. Despite congestion behind the British front line and the delays this caused in delivering supplies and reinforcements, Lieutenant General Richard O'Connor, the VIII Corps commander, recommended that greater account be taken of topography in the selection of objectives and that the occupation of high ground be favoured over attacks on villages. The British and Canadians had used their increasing experience and kept the initiative, but the Germans had not withdrawn. Despite the cost of such defensive operations, the commanding views from Hill 112 were of great tactical importance, but the highest point of the hill was relinquished by the British and left as a no man's land, with the two sides dug in on either side. Several villages in the vicinity had been taken and the Germans had been provoked into counter-attacking British penetrations. The 9th SS Panzer Division, which had been moving out of the line to form an operational reserve, was brought back to contain the attack, and the German troops involved in counter-attacks were exposed to Allied firepower, which inflicted severe casualties and deprived the German defense of the ability to conduct a counter-offensive. Tank versus tank engagements continued to take place at fewer than 1,000 yards, at which the 150 mm armor of Churchill tanks was insufficient to resist handheld hollow charge weapons of the high-velocity 75 mm and 88 mm guns used by the Germans. British tank-mounted medium-velocity 75 mm guns could not penetrate the frontal armor of Panther tanks or the armor of Tiger tanks from any direction. Casualties and commemoration: the 43rd Division lost 2,000 men in the operation and 7,000 casualties from 10 to 22 July. The 31st Tank Brigade had 25% tank casualties. The importance of the battles for Hill 112 is remembered by the erection by the 5th DCLI in August 1944, labeled Cornwall Wood. A larger wooden memorial to the 43rd Division was built by the residents of Normandy, to the combatants and civilians who were killed soon afterwards. A stone memorial was built at Hill 112 by the 43rd Division in the late 1940s, and similar memorials are at Wynyards Gap in North Dorset, Castle Hill, Mere in Wiltshire and Rough Tor in Cornwall. Subsequent operations: the 11th of July. At dusk on the 11th of July, the 4th Battalion, Somerset Light Infantry of 129th Brigade made a silent attack on the crest of Hill 112, with D Company in the centre attacking to reoccupy the orchard, A Company on the right and C Company on the left. Her company crossed the Con-Eversey Road and tried to dig in, but found the ground too hard for their tools, and then the Germans were alerted by British machine gun fire. D Company got to the edge of Cornwall Wood, then received machine gun fire, much of which ricocheted from knocked-out tanks. A platoon strayed to the right and disappeared. Troops of the 19th SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment discovered the advance and managed to repulse the British, then found that the Germans on the other side of the orchard had retired. Constant artillery, mortar and machine gun fire swept the top of Hill 112 and made it untenable for both sides. Positions below the crest where troops could assemble for an attack were frequently bombarded. Some small parties of the 5th DCLI remained in the orchard, not having heard of the retirement, and after 4 days, a group which sent 4 German prisoners down the hill were ordered back down the hill. Operation Green Line. 15 to 17 July. The crossroads at Le Bon Repos and the higher ground overlooking Esquin Notre Dame were attacked by the 2nd Battalion, Glasgow Highlanders of the 227th Brigade. supported by Churchill tanks of the 107th Regiment Royal Armoured Corps from the 34th Tank Brigade and the 141st RAC of the 79th Armoured Division, equipped with Churchill Armoured Vehicle Royal Engineers and Churchill Crocodile flamethrower tanks. The Highlanders advanced from the northeast of Hill 112 southwest over the northern slope towards the defences of the 3 Battalion, 21st SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment. As the infantry emerged from dead ground, they were met by massed mortar fire, which temporarily disorganized the battalion, as did a smoke screen placed on Hill 112, which had merged with fog and covered the area. The Highlanders managed to cross the start line on time at 9:30 p.m. and captured the SS survivors of a flame attack by the Crocodiles on the Conevracy Road between Croix des Filandras and Le Bon Repos. The advance continued downhill under Monty's moonlight and covering fire from the 107th RAC Churchills on the higher ground just south of Baron-sur-Odon was raided around 11 o'clock p.m., but not held, as its position below a saucer of higher ground made it a shell trap. The troops dug in on the rises north of Eski, at positions determined earlier using reconnaissance photographs. Tiger tanks of 102nd Schwer SS Panzer Abteilung were sent up the southern slope of Hill 112 to repulse an attack that never came. Further west, the rest of the 15th Division had captured Point 113 but not Eversea, which left the 2nd Glasgow Highlanders overlooked from both flanks. Although German counter-attacks by infantry of the 21st SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment and tanks of the 10th SS Panzer Regiment at first concentrated on Eski, which had already been evacuated, the German counter-attack then fell on the positions around Le Bon Repos, where 2 Panzer IV were knocked out by 6-pounder anti-tank guns. The Scottish were pushed back several times, only for the medium artillery of 12th Corps to bombard the Germans back out. On the 18th of July, 107th RAC skirmished with dug-in Tigers and 288mm self-propelled guns, losing 4 tanks on the ridge. The Highlanders maintained their positions for 2 days before being relieved by a battalion of the 53rd Infantry Division. Operation Express. The 22nd of July, Operation Express was to begin from Louvigny. The 5th Battalion, Wiltshire Regiment of 129 Brigade, and B Squadron of the 9th RTR of the 31st Tank Brigade, were to capture the village and orchards north of the road from Louvigny, and the 4th Wilts with a squadron 9th RTR were to attack the woods, orchards and a spur southeast of Maltot. The 4th Somerset Light Infantry were kept in reserve, ready to exploit any success. On the east bank of the Orne, the 5th Canadian Infantry Brigade of the 2nd Canadian Division raided Éterville with 2 companies along the railway close to the river, supported by creeping barrage and tanks from the Sherbrooke Fusiliers on higher ground. Several Canadian soldiers rushed German machine gun nests and enabled the advance to continue to the village, where they fought with the German garrison until the British barrage was due and then retired. After Maltot was captured, the Canadians returned to occupy the village and took c. 100 prisoners from the 272nd Division, for a loss of 108 casualties. Operation Express began at 5:30 p.m., and on the right side of the road the 5th Wilts advanced behind a smoke screen and an artillery barrage. The German defenders were surprised and at first were stunned by the bombardment. As the British moved through the village, some defenders recovered and hand-to-hand fighting took place. Grenadiers from the 10th SS Panzer Division and Tiger tanks from the 102nd Schwer SS Panzer Abteilung began a counter attack as Maltot was entered, and knocked out several Churchill tanks of B Squadron. A British forward air controller saw the German tanks and called in Hawker Typhoon fighter bombers, which forced the Tigers back to Hill 112, while the Grenadiers reinforced the German infantry in the village. On the other side of the Louvigny Road, the 4th Wiltshire A Squadron advanced through woods and farms to the final objective, south of the village. The infantry went first, 2 sections in front of each tank, with the squadron commander on foot accompanying the infantry commanders. When it was seen that the 4th Wilts across the road had been delayed by the German defense of Lieu-de-France farm at the east end of Maltot, Churchill and Churchill Crocodile tanks advanced, bombarded and flamed the defenders and then overran the position. As the advance moved into the woods, small parties of British and German infantry stalked each other through trees, small quarries and trenches. The defenders were overrun in about 2 hours and mopping up began, but some German troops held out as dark fell. Most of the surviving defenders retired to Chateau Maltot on the far side of the road and were cut off. As the 4th Wilts moved forward to the Raude Maltot stream, they were stopped by fire from the chateau. Bombardment by the Churchills prompted a German medic to request a truce, which was offered provided that all German troops in the chateau surrender, which was refused. At dusk the British attacked and broke into the ground floor but were held back by showers of hand grenades. Overnight the outbuildings were captured and the chateau was kept under fire by the tanks. From 9:30 to 10 o'clock p.m., both battalions reached the final objectives to the west of Maltot and the woods to the south. The tanks withdrew, having lost 8 vehicles, and just after dawn, the remaining Germans in the chateau gave up. By the end of the operation, the 10th SS Panzer Division had been reduced from c. 15,000 men to 2,289, and only the most vital positions could be counter-attacked. At dawn, the British were met by the sight of the dead from Operation Jupiter and by long-range fire from German tanks and guns on the southeast ridge of Hill 112. The Wilts had taken more than 400 prisoners, in what they claimed to be a textbook operation. Commanders had studied maps, photographs and sand models, had been given time to establish infantry-tank cooperation with 7th RTR and conduct reconnaissance. The 43rd Division was withdrawn and the ground taken over by the 53rd Division. The Germans withdrew from Hill 112 in August. During Operation Cobra and Operation Bluecoat further west, the 53rd Division occupied the feature with barely a fight on the 4th of August.